the question. It may not be more of a question, more of like a statement that you can respond to. But
Okay.
you brought up a lot about morality, you know, in your lecture and everything, and also in some of the questions. But I've argued myself, and I've heard a lot of people also argue, that from a moral perspective, you can, well, okay, I'll just start it with, like, you said that morality kind of points to God, right? Or that morality is from God, or derived from God.
There's a standard beyond us to which our moral sentiments point.
Right, but a lot of people across the world, as well as myself in some ways, would say that on a moral level, looking at things, like, it would point away from God. Not because there's bad things that happen or whatever, but you can look at, like, the doctrines of religions, or, like, you know, the Abrahamic religions, for example, and just say, well, from a moral perspective, those aren't exactly very moral. That's what I would say. Like genocide, you know, things like that, and, you know, a lot of troubling things. And I'm sure you've probably heard these questions before. But you could argue on a moral level that why you wouldn't believe in something even if it was true, or even if, you know, there was a lot of evidence presented to you that it might be true. For example, when you said, I had a lot of atheists come before me and say, would you believe in Christianity if it was true? And they said, no. I think the reason why they would say that is because on a moral level they disagree with it. So I'm just, like, curious about what would you say.
Well, if an atheist says that I don't believe in the God of the Bible because I think the God of the Bible is immoral, my first statement's going to be, what do you mean by immoral? Because you don't have a standard by which to judge the God of the Bible. No objective standard, it's just your subjective opinion. You just don't like the God of the Bible. But that's not a moral position, that's just your own subjective opinion. So atheists don't have a standard by which they can judge the God of the Bible or anybody else. Now, what an atheist could say is, okay, let me not be an atheist for a second. Let me just say, if you're saying your God is a good God, why does he do these things in the Old Testament, say? That's a good question for an atheist to ask. Is that the question you're asking?
Something like that. Or, like, for example, like when you mentioned the Nazis and everything, I was like, well, these people were defined as subhuman. That's why they could kill them.
Right.
But in, you know, the Old Testament, it was like, well, the Canaanites, you know, were, you know, they basically had to be, like, you're massacred on, like, a, you know, a crazy amount, because, you know, if you, like, read some of the Old Testament books, like, they go, like, from, like, city to city, killing all the people.
All right, let's take
you know,
a look
things
at
like
that. I got the gist, okay? Is God immoral for killing the Canaanites? This is a question, a common question.
Yeah.
Let me just start out by pointing out that if there is no God, why is any so-called Old Testament atrocity wrong? This is a question I asked atheists, to which they respond, if they're honest, they'll say, okay, but it's still a problem for your worldview. The next question is this: is God arbitrary, or does he give reasons for judging people in the Old Testament? Is he arbitrary, or does he say, here's why these people need to go? The answer is, they've been doing all sorts of awful things for 400 years, and I've been patient, but now it's Judgment Day. In fact, one of the things the Canaanites were doing is they were sacrificing their babies to the molten hot metal god known as Molech. What they would do is they would heat this metal idol up, then they would put their babies on its hot arms, and the babies would literally sizzle to death. Plutarch, a Greek writer, writes of this, and he says that the drummers in the community, when this ceremony was going on, would drum louder so the parents of the kids being sacrificed wouldn't hear the screams of their own children. Now, on every college campus I go to, an atheist normally says, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? Well, here's an instance where God steps in to stop it, and the atheists are complaining about it. Right? I mean, why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Now, what they will say is, okay, God should have stopped the parents from doing this, but why did he have to wipe out all the culture, you know, the women, the children? Because it does seem to say, hey, wipe everybody out, right? There are two views on this. One is put forth by Paul Copan, a scholar down at Palm Beach University, I think it is. And he's wrote a book called Is God a Moral Monster? And he notes that if you look at the passages closely, like Deuteronomy 7, it'll say, wipe everybody out. And then right after that, it'll say, and then don't intermarry with them. You guys see a problem with this? How could you intermarry with a group you just wiped out? You couldn't. Copan points out that in the ancient Near East culture, this was very common to use hyperbolic language to say, annihilate these people, when it really all it meant was defeat them, push them out of the land. Okay, we do that in sports today. We annihilated you. Really? They're gone? The other team's gone? No. It's an exaggeration, all right? Now, even if Copan is wrong about that, even if these are literal commands, note this. Is God committing murder by ending lives on earth? No, why not? He's God, right? He's God. He gives life. He can take life. He can take life anytime he wants. In fact, if Christianity's true, people don't really die, they just change locations, right? They go from this life to the next life, and God can do that whenever he wants. In fact, God has the right to usher people into the next life, whether they are 2 years old or 82 years old, because people never die, they just change locations. So while it's not fair for us to take innocent life, God can do it anytime he wants. Also, one other note about this. I was at the University of Central Oklahoma. You can see this on YouTube. It's one of the questions. There was a young lady who asked a question, and she said, I can't believe in a God who would do this kind of thing. And so I said, can I ask you a question? Are you pro-abortion or pro-life? She said, oh, I'm pro-abortion. I said, let me ask you a question about that. Why is it that when God plays God in the Old Testament, when he chooses who lives and who dies, he's immoral? But when you play God here on earth and you decide who lives and who dies through abortion, that's a moral right. You see, people claim God can't be God, but they can. That's just blatantly inconsistent.